So if you're going to move on and do a panel, to figure out the size of the panel, we're going to have to follow the instructions on here. It says measure from lip to lip once it's put together. So width from lip to lip plus a 1/16. So I'm going to measure, put this together, make sure my ends are nice and flat, and I'm going to measure from this lip here, which on this little piece would be this top lip right here. So I'm measuring from this lip on one side to the lip on the other. So I'm just going to take my tape measure and measure with this pushed together. Try not to jostle it apart. And I've got this at 8 1/8. So I'm going to put that in my top line here, 8 1/8. And then it tells me to add a 1/16 and the answer goes below. So that's going to be 8 3/16. Now I'm going to measure the height from lip to lip. I'm going to turn this door so I can not have to reach the far end so much, and I want to make sure my joints stay flat or flush. I don't want to get it too small or too big, so it's important that that joint stays nice and even on both ends. If you need to, if this is moving around on you, you could throw a clamp on here so that it doesn't slide apart. And now we're going to measure from this lip down here to this lip. So I'm going to come down here and very carefully, without pushing it apart, and measure. And I'm getting 21 5/8. So I'm going to write that down, 21 5/8. And then it tells me to add a 1/16 and the answer goes below. So 21 11/16 is my answer. That's how we figure out for the door for the panel. Now you've got to figure out what kind of panel you're using: flat panel, raised panel, or glass. If you have glass, you would skip this section. We're going to be doing a raised panel, so I'm going to get those panels glued together. We know how big they need to finish at, so I'm going to rough cut them bigger. And then after that, we're going to show you how to run those through the shaper as well. I have a sample door here to look at before we get our pieces run. We're making the raised panel slope up to the top panel. And what we want is for the panel itself to sit even with the stiles and rails. This way, when we're done, if we need to run this through the wide belt sander to clean up our joints of our door, our panel is not sticking up higher than the rest of the project or the rest of the door. So when we're finished, our goal is to have the panel the same height as the stiles and the rails when you are all done with the project. So to determine the thickness, we know we want it to be the same there. And if we look at the back of the door, our setup, we do not have a bit to cut the back cut on the panel. So on our back of our panel, it's actually going to just be flat like this. Our panel is actually sitting lower than the doors, the stile and rail pieces of the door. You can see there, it's not sitting flat. Now, if we had the back cut bit, then what would happen is we wouldn't have to take our panels down to 5/8, because then that extra material would be right here and it would be flat, and then there would be a little recess, not quite as big or dramatic as this slope, but there'd be a little recess with maybe a slight indication or slope, and then this would sit flat with the stile and rails. Not a big deal. We're just going to leave it flat on the back, no back cut on our doors that we have. So we've taken ahead of time, and I can tell you that we need this panel to be 5/8 of an inch thick, to be flush with the front and to sit in here without the back cut nice and even. So therefore our pieces here have been run through the sander and the planer, and they're down to 5/8 of an inch thick. So now we're ready to go run them, because when we're done, they're going to be the right size. All right, this is our third shaper that we were talking about earlier, where you notice that the distance between the fence and the power feeder is bigger. And you can see down in there, that blade is pretty big and massive. So what we're going to end up doing, because that blade sticks out so far, when we run our pieces through here, we're actually going to have them away from the fence the first pass. That way it can kind of remove off some of the material, and then the second pass is going to be up tight and clean off the rest. Now we have a little bit of a predicament with our pieces. Our pieces are a little bit small. So right here there's not much surface area, and there's a big gap in there where the blade is. So what we're going to end up doing, because these are so small, these are shorter than 9 inches, I would say about 12 inches is the minimum you would want to go. We're going to actually put these side by side and clamp them. So as this feeds through, it's like it's one long board. My clamp has to be out here away from the power feeder, and I'm going to set this up. I should be able to do it right here. That's what this is going to look like. I've got my bar clamp holding these two together. My clamp is out of the way of the table, so as I'm running through, this bar is not going to catch, this pad over here is not going to catch on the edge of the table. My handle is up out of the way, it's not going to catch on the table. So I'm going to run them through one time on the end, or about 2 times, 2 passes, and then I'm going to have to unclamp them, turn them around, and clamp the other side so the clamp's out of the way. So just like our other machine, the power feeder is a separate unit. It needs to be turned on to number 2. If you turn it on the wrong way, you're not going to be able to feed it in. So number 2 is where we want it. We'll turn on the machine down here with the switch. The green switch in here is on, the red outside is off. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn the dust system on, so it's going to be kind of loud. You won't be able to hear us as we're running this through, but you can at least get an idea what this is going to look like. Again, we always want to do our end grains first. All right, so we got done running that one edge. Now the thickness here can be changed based on how high the blade is set. So if the blade was lower, it's going to make this thinner. If the blade is higher, it's going to be thicker. So what's important is that we check with one of our stiles and rails to make sure that we've got a good fit. So if I put it in here, okay, I don't want it to be extremely tight because there's got to be some movement for the door to float and as the wood expands and contracts and move a little bit. So I don't want it super loose either. I don't want to have like, you know, a 1/16 of an inch gap in there necessarily, but there should be a little bit of wiggle room. It shouldn't be super tight. I shouldn't have to force this in. So that's how you can tell if you've got the right thickness, is how it fits in that stile and rail profile. All right, so we've got our boards turned around. Our original cut was down here. We're now going to do the other end. All right, so we have our panel now run on the end grain. We've got the slope up there. We've got it done on both ends. So now we're going to come up with the grain and run it through. And again, I'm going to maintain that gap away from the fence the first pass or two, and I want to remove little bits at a time. Especially with hickory like this, it tends to chip or break real easy. And so we want to give it plenty of time, let the machine do the work and do the cutting, and we don't want to force it through. So I'm going to have maybe my first pass kind of have a, you know, an 1.5 inch gap there. My next pass, maybe I'm down to about 3/4, and then my final pass will be up tight against the fence. So we're going to turn the dust system on and we'll run these through and show you. So after running these, each one of my panels ended up with a little defect on the side. And now some of this is kind of deep that I don't know if that stile and rail is going to cover that entirely up. There's that one, and then on this panel there's a nice big chip down here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take both of these panels, and I'm going to take about a 32nd of an inch off on the table saw on the side that's bad. And that's going to allow me to rerun this side and take a little bit more off of the material. Now, I don't know that it's not guaranteed that this won't chip more after I cut it and it runs through again, but that's what I'm going to attempt to do before I would remake a panel. Is I do have a little bit of play in there. I could be a little bit smaller, and those space balls that we're using, or those spacers when we glue the project together, are going to help account for some of that shortness if it's a little bit short. So we're going to go cut these down about a 32nd, 16th of an inch, somewhere in there. All right, now that we've cut them down, we're going to go ahead and run that through, and let's see if it helps take out any of that material so it's not so far into the project. So that chip is still there. Okay, I should have made a pencil mark, and we'll do that on the next one to see if we can see if it's leaving the pencil mark behind. But if we take our piece and line this up, if you remember when we measured from this top lip. So if I hold this about where that top lip is on the piece, I could then verify or see if any of that chip is going to be exposed when I'm done. Okay, so if it is, I may have to fill it with some filler, sand it and blend it, or I may have to just start over on a new panel if it's that severe or bad. All right, those turned out not too bad. Now we've got some burn marks on here. We've got some mill marks that we're gonna have to clean up. And we have a few spots that chipped a little bit on us. And some of this is going to be inside the stile and rail, so we're not gonna see a lot of that as that stile fits onto the side. But we do need to sand not only the curve here, because once we put this door together, we can't get in there. And the other thing we're gonna have to sand is the back. If we don't do the back now, we're gonna have those stiles and rails on there. We're gonna have inside corners that are difficult to sand. So at this point in the process, you need to sand the panels of the door to get them ready to be glued together. So we're gonna use an orbital sander for the bulk of this. Now we're going to take that orbital sander, and we should be able to hold it on here, and this pad should kind of follow that radius as we're sanding. So I should be able to get in there pretty good along that radius as we're sanding the panel. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to start with the backs, and then I'll flip them over and do the other side. So if we take a look at these up close, this one has not been sanded. You can very easily identify those mill marks or blade marks in there, some burn spots. This one's been sanded. You can see we can't really see any of those mill marks. Now it's important when we're sanding that we don't mess with this little taper that comes down in the corner. When we're sanding, we want to sand this surface, but don't try to turn the corner while you're doing it, or you're going to mess up that angle or that little slope there that kind of creates that slope up to the side. So we want to be careful that we don't mess that up. And we're going to keep going around all four sides of this. I'm not going to worry about the top right now, because after we glue this project together, we're going to re-sand the door as a whole, and this is going to get hit in the wide belt sander. So right now I'm just worried about this profile. All right, now is a great opportunity to examine your door, and if you have any spots that have little chips that are not going to be covered up by the Stile, you can sand on those a little bit more, but just make sure you don't stay in one spot too long. You want to blend or feather that in. And then also, if it's a deep gouge, you may consider putting some wood filler in there if you have some to match your species of wood. Now I'm gonna maybe just hit these a little bit longer with the sander. They're not really deep enough for wood filler. I might try on one or two of these, and then I'll touch them up again with the sander after I put the filler in. So both of these panels have now been cleaned up around their profile and on the back side. So we're now ready to take these over and glue our doors together. Glue the stiles and rails around the door. If you have any questions on making the panels or the raised panel portion of the door, please talk to your instructor and they'll help get any questions answered that you may have.